The woman was already falling through the air when Yates Zimmerman looked up from tightening his saddle, and something in his chest told him to move before his mind could catch up. She had jumped from the moving train, her green dress billowing around her like a broken parachute, and he dropped everything to sprint across the dusty ground of Stockton, California, his boots pounding against the hard-packed earth as the locomotive continued its relentless chug toward Sacramento. He reached the spot just as she plummeted, catching her weight against his chest hard enough to knock them both to the ground in a tangle of limbs and petticoats and dust that rose around them like a cloud. For a moment they lay there, her heart hammering against his ribs, his arms locked around her waist, both of them breathing hard. Then she pushed herself up, her dark hair falling from its pins, her gray eyes wild and desperate as she looked back at the train already pulling away, and he saw something in her face that made him swallow every question that rose to his tongue. "Thank you," she gasped, her voice hoarse and shaking, and she scrambled to her feet with such urgency that he knew someone on that train was the reason she had jumped. He stood slowly, dusting off his worn denim pants, and looked at her properly for the first time. She was young, maybe 22 or 23, with a face that would have been beautiful if it was not currently twisted with fear and determination. Her dress was expensive, the kind worn by wealthy women from San Francisco, but it was torn now at the hem and stained with the red dust of the rail yard. She kept glancing at the train as it rounded the bend and disappeared, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You are safe now," Yates said quietly, and he meant it, though he had no idea what she was running from. At 26, he had seen enough of life to know that some stories were better left untold until the teller was ready. He had been a cowboy for 8 years, working cattle ranches from Texas to California, and he had learned that the West was full of people running from something. He never judged them for it. His own past had enough shadows. She looked at him then, really looked at him, taking in his sun-weathered face and the scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, the result of a bad fall from a spooked horse when he was 19. His dark blonde hair needed cutting, and his blue eyes were steady and calm, the kind of calm that came from facing down stampedes and spending weeks alone on the range with nothing but cattle and stars for company. "I need to leave Stockton," she said, her voice stronger now. "Today. Right now." He nodded once, not asking why, not asking where she wanted to go or who she was running from. "I am heading to a ranch about 30 miles east, in the foothills. The owner is a friend, and he always needs help. You can come with me if you want. There is a boarding house there run by a woman named Mrs. Chen. She does not ask questions." Something in her face softened, just a fraction, as if his lack of questions was the greatest gift anyone had ever given her. "My name is Diana," she said, and he noticed she did not offer a last name. "Yates," he replied, and then he turned and walked back to where his horse was tied, a sturdy bay gelding named Rusty who had carried him across half of California. He untied the reins and led the horse over to where Diana stood, still watching the empty tracks as if afraid the train might return. "Can you ride?" "Not well," she admitted, and there was something in her voice that told him she came from a world of carriages and train cars, not saddles and stirrups. "But I will learn if I have to." He swung up onto Rusty's back and then reached down, offering her his hand. "You will ride with me. It is not far, and the horse can handle both of us." She hesitated for only a moment before placing her small hand in his calloused palm, and he pulled her up behind him with an ease that came from years of hauling stubborn calves and thrown ropes. She settled against his back, her arms wrapping around his waist, and he could feel her trembling despite the June heat that made the air shimmer above the dusty streets. "Hold on," he said, and then he urged Rusty into a steady trot, leaving Stockton behind them as they headed east toward the Sierra Nevada foothills. It was 1882, and California was still wild in places, still full of open spaces and possibilities. The Transcontinental Railroad had been completed 13 years ago, bringing civilization and commerce, but there were still places where a person could disappear if they needed to, places where the law was as fluid as the rivers that carved through the mountains. They rode in silence for the first hour, Diana's grip tight around his middle, her face pressed against his shoulder. He could feel the tension in her body, the way she kept looking back over her shoulder as if expecting pursuit. But the road behind them stayed empty, just dust and scrub brush and the occasional lizard darting across their path. The sun climbed higher, turning the sky a brilliant blue, and gradually he felt her begin to relax, her breathing evening out, her hold loosening just slightly. "Why did you not ask?" she said finally, her voice barely audible over the sound of Rusty's hooves. "Why did you not ask why I jumped?" He thought about that for a moment, watching a hawk circle overhead. "Because it is your story to tell or not tell. I figure if you want me to know, you will say so. If you do not, then it is none of my business." She was quiet for a long time after that, and he wondered if he had said the wrong thing. But then she sighed, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her, and she said, "Thank you for that too." They stopped at midday to rest the horse and eat the jerky and hardtack Yates carried in his saddlebag. Diana sat on a fallen log in the shade of an oak tree, her torn dress spread around her, and ate the tough, dried meat without complaint. He offered her his canteen, and she drank deeply, water spilling down her chin. She wiped it away with the back of her hand, a gesture that seemed too natural for someone who wore such an expensive dress. "What is the ranch like?" she asked, handing the canteen back to him. "The one where we are going." "It is a good place, Guy," he said, settling down on the ground with his back against the tree trunk. "The owner is a man named Robert McAllister. He runs about 500 head of cattle, mostly breeding stock. The work is hard but fair, and he treats his people well." Mrs. Chen runs the boarding house in the little town nearby, about 2 miles from the ranch. She came from China 30 years ago with her husband during the gold rush. He died of fever, but she stayed and built a good life. She takes in women who need a place to stay, no questions asked. Diana looked down at her hands, which were already showing signs of sunburn. "And you think she will take me in, even though I have no money, no references, nothing?" "She will take you in," Yates said with certainty. "And if you need work, there are always jobs: cooking, laundry, mending. The ranch hands always need someone to keep their clothes in order, and the ranch house can always use help. You will not starve, and you will be safe." "Safe," she repeated, as if testing the word on her tongue. Then she looked up at him, her gray eyes direct and serious. "How can you be so sure? You do not even know what I'm running from. What if I bring danger to your friends?" He met her gaze steadily. "I saw your face when you jumped from that train. I saw someone who was desperate enough to risk death rather than stay where they were. That tells me enough. Whatever you are running from, I do not think you are the dangerous one in that story." Her eyes filled with tears then, sudden and bright, and she turned her face away quickly, but not before he saw one spill down her cheek. He pretended not to notice, giving her time to compose herself, and when she turned back a few minutes later, her face was dry and determined once more. They reached the ranch as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The main house was a sprawling structure of wood and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Beyond it were the bunkhouse, the barn, corrals, and various outbuildings. Cattle dotted the hillsides, their lowing carrying on the evening breeze. It was a peaceful scene, the kind of place that felt far removed from the chaos of cities and trains and whatever Diana was fleeing. Robert McAllister came out to greet them as Yates rode up to the main house. He was a bear of a man in his 50s, with gray streaking his dark beard and eyes that crinkled at the corners from years of squinting into the sun. "Yates?" he called out, his voice booming with genuine pleasure. "Did not expect you back so soon. Thought you were going to Stockton for supplies." "Change of plans," Yates said, dismounting and then helping Diana down from the horse. She stood beside him, her chin lifted despite the exhaustion written in every line of her body. "Robert, this is Diana. She needs a place to stay, and I thought Mrs. Chen might have a room." Robert's gaze moved from Yates to Diana, taking in her expensive dress and her obvious weariness, and something in his face softened. "Any friend of Yates is welcome here," he said simply. "My wife Margaret is inside. She will get you cleaned up and fed, and then we will ride over to Mrs. Chen's place. It is only a couple miles down the road." Diana's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I will work to repay your kindness. I promise I will not be a burden." "Nonsense," came a woman's voice from the doorway, and Margaret McAllister stepped out onto the porch. She was a handsome woman in her late 40s, with auburn hair streaked with silver and a no-nonsense expression that softened when she saw Diana. "You look like you have been through an ordeal, dear. Come inside and let us take care of you. Yates, you can stable your horse and then come in for supper." Yates watched as Margaret took Diana's arm and led her into the house, talking softly about baths and food and rest. When they disappeared inside, Robert turned to him with a questioning look. "Want to tell me what happened?" "She jumped from a moving train this morning," Yates said quietly. "Jumped right off while it was pulling out of Stockton. I caught her before she hit the ground too hard." Robert let out a low whistle. "Must have been running from something terrible." "I did not ask." "Good man," Robert said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You did right. We will keep her safe, whatever she needs. Now come on, let us get that horse taken care of. You look like you could use some food yourself." That evening, after a meal of beef stew and fresh bread, Robert drove Diana and Yates to town in his wagon. Mrs. Chen's boarding house was a neat 2-story building with a garden in front full of vegetables and flowers. Lanterns glowed in the windows, making it look warm and welcoming in the gathering darkness. An older Chinese woman came to the door when Robert knocked, her silver hair pulled back in a bun, her dark eyes sharp and assessing. "Robert," she said, her English accented but clear, "what brings you here so late?" "This is Diana," Robert said, gesturing to where Diana stood with Yates just behind her. "She needs a room and a fresh start. Yates brought her here from Stockton today." Mrs. Chen looked at Diana for a long moment, and Diana met her gaze without flinching. Finally, Mrs. Chen nodded. "I have a room on the second floor, clean bed, wash basin, lock on the door. $5 a week, includes breakfast and supper. If you need work, I can find you something." "I do not have any money right now," Diana said, her voice steady despite the admission. "But I will work for my room and board until I can pay you back. I can cook and clean and sew. I will do whatever you need." "Can you keep books?" Mrs. Chen asked. "I need someone to help with accounts. My eyes are not as good as they used to be, and the numbers blur together." "Yes," Diana said immediately. "I am good with figures." "Then we have an arrangement," Mrs. Chen said, opening the door wider. "Come in. I will show you to your room." Diana turned to look at Yates, and in her eyes he saw gratitude and something else, something that made his heart beat a little faster. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. For catching me, for not asking, for bringing me here. I will not forget your kindness." "You do not need to thank me," he said, meaning it. "I'm glad I could help. I will be at the ranch if you need anything. Just send word with Robert or one of the hands." She nodded, and then Mrs. Chen was leading her inside and the door was closing, and Yates was left standing on the porch with Robert, feeling oddly bereft. He told himself it was just concern for her safety, just the natural worry any decent person would feel for someone in trouble. But as they rode back to the ranch in the darkness, he could not stop thinking about the way she had felt in his arms when he caught her, the way her voice had sounded when she thanked him, the way her eyes had held his for just a moment too long before she went inside. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. Yates worked the ranch during the day, riding fence lines and moving cattle and doing the 100 other tasks that came with ranch work. But every evening after supper, he found himself riding into town, telling himself he was just checking on Diana, making sure she was settling in all right. Mrs. Chen would invite him in for tea, and Diana would join them on the porch, and they would talk as the sun set and the stars came out. He learned things about her in small pieces, like assembling a puzzle. She was 23 years old, from San Francisco originally. She had been educated in a private school, could read and write and do sums with ease. She loved books, especially poetry and adventure stories. She had a quick wit and a laugh that sounded like music. But she never talked about her family, never mentioned why she had been on that train or who she was running from. And true to his word, he never asked. In turn, she learned about him. He told her about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, the third of 5 children. His father had died when he was 16, and he had left home to find work, sending money back to help his mother and siblings. He had worked cattle drives, breaking horses, anything that needed doing. He had learned to rope and ride and read the weather to survive on little and appreciate the simple things. He told her about the places he had seen, the mountains and deserts and endless prairies, the way the West felt like freedom itself sometimes. "Do you ever want to settle down?" she asked him one evening as they sat on the porch steps, the sounds of the town settling for the night around them. "Have a place of your own instead of always working for someone else?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "I've been saving money for years now. I have enough to buy some land, start my own small operation, but I have not found the right place yet. Or maybe I have not found the right reason." She looked at him then, her gray eyes searching his face in the lamplight, and something passed between them, some understanding that neither of them was ready to name. "Maybe you will," she said softly. "Find the right reason, I mean." As the summer progressed, Diana became part of the community. She kept Mrs. Chen's books with meticulous care, and word spread that she was good with figures. Soon other businesses in town were bringing her their accounts to reconcile. She made friends with the other women at the boarding house, women with their own complicated pasts and reasons for being there. She learned to ride, taking lessons from Yates on one of the ranch's gentler horses. And though she was not a natural in the saddle, she was determined and she improved. And slowly, carefully, something grew between her and Yates. It was there in the way he always seemed to find reasons to come to town, in the way she watched for him every evening, her face lighting up when she saw him riding down the main street. It was in the casual touches that lingered a moment too long, his hand on her elbow as he helped her down from a horse, her fingers brushing his when she handed him a cup of coffee. It was in the conversations that stretched longer and longer into the night, until Mrs. Chen would clear her throat meaningfully and Diana would blush and say goodnight. One evening in late July, they were sitting on the porch when a group of riders came down the street, their horses kicking up dust. Yates did not think much of it until he saw Diana tense beside him, her whole body going rigid. The riders passed by without stopping, heading toward the saloon, but Diana's hands were shaking as she gripped the porch rail. "Diana," he said quietly, concern sharpening his voice. "What is wrong?" "Nothing," she said quickly, too quickly. "I just thought I recognized someone, but I was wrong. It was nothing." But it was not nothing, and they both knew it. That night, for the first time since he had brought her here, Yates saw real fear in her eyes again, the same fear that had been there when she jumped from the train. The riders left town the next morning, and Diana relaxed again, but something had shifted. The past she had been running from felt suddenly closer, more real. A few days later, as they were riding back from a picnic by the creek, Diana pulled her horse to a stop on a small rise overlooking the valley. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and red, and she sat there for a long moment, just looking out at the landscape. Yates stopped beside her, waiting, sensing that she had something to say. "His name was Richard Harlow," she said finally, her voice barely audible over the evening breeze. "The man I was running from. We were engaged to be married." Yates felt his stomach tighten, but he kept his voice calm. "Were you in love with him?" "No," she said, and there was absolute certainty in that single word. "My father arranged the marriage. Richard is wealthy, well-connected in San Francisco society. He owns shipping interests and real estate. My father owed him money, gambling debts that had gotten out of hand. The marriage was his way of settling the debt and securing his own position." "And you did not want to marry him?" She turned to look at Yates then, and in her eyes he saw pain and anger and determination. "He was cruel," she said simply. "Not in public, of course. In public, he was charming and attentive and everything a proper gentleman should be. But in private, when no one was watching, I saw who he really was. The way he spoke to his servants. The way he grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises when I disagreed with him. The way he looked at me like I was something he owned. I knew that if I married him, my life would be a living hell. So when my father put me on that train to meet Richard in Sacramento for our wedding, I decided I would rather die than go through with it. And when the train stopped in Stockton, I jumped. Yates felt anger rising in his chest, hot and fierce, but he kept it under control. Does your father know where you are? I do not think so. I used my mother's maiden name when I introduced myself here, Harding instead of my real name, and I have not written to anyone in San Francisco. As far as they know, I disappeared after jumping from that train. Maybe they think I died. Maybe they are still looking. I do not know. And Richard Harlow? Would he come looking for you himself? He might, she admitted. He does not like losing things he considers his. That is why I have been so careful. Why I was so frightened when those riders came through town. I thought maybe he had sent men to search for me. Yates reached over and took her hand, his fingers wrapping around hers. Listen to me, Diana. You are safe here. Robert and Margaret know. Mrs. Chen knows. And the whole town would stand behind you if it came to it. And I will not let anyone take you anywhere you do not want to go. I promise you that. She looked down at their joined hands, and when she looked back up, there were tears on her cheeks. Why are you so good to me? You do not even know me, not really. You do not know if I am worth all this trouble. I know enough, he said. And then, because he could not hold it back any longer, he said, I know that I have never met anyone like you. I know that you are brave and strong and kind. I know that I think about you every minute of every day. I know that I'm falling in love with you, if I have not already fallen completely. The words hung in the air between them. And for a moment, Diana just stared at him, her eyes wide. Then she leaned across the space between their horses and kissed him, her lips soft and warm against his. It was a tentative kiss at first, hesitant, but then it deepened, and Yates felt something in his chest crack open, something he had kept locked away for years. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard, and Diana was smiling, really smiling for the first time since he had met her. I am falling in love with you too, she whispered. I have been fighting it because I was afraid that my past would catch up with me, afraid that I would bring you trouble, afraid that I did not deserve something good after everything that happened, but I cannot fight it anymore. I do not want to fight it anymore. They rode back to town slowly, hands linked between their horses, talking about everything and nothing, making plans for a future that suddenly seemed possible. Yates asked her to come to a dance that was being held at the ranch the following Saturday, and she said yes without hesitation. Mrs. Chen smiled knowingly when they returned and said nothing about how late it was or how flushed Diana's cheeks were. The dance was a community affair with half the county showing up. Margaret and the other ranch wives had decorated the barn with lanterns and wildflowers, and someone had brought a fiddle and a guitar. The music was lively and the dancing was enthusiastic, if not always skilled. Yates danced with Diana again and again, holding her close as they moved to the music, and he was pretty sure everyone there could see exactly how he felt about her. He did not care. They stepped outside for air between songs, walking a little way from the barn into the quiet darkness. The stars were brilliant overhead, the Milky Way a river of light across the sky. Diana tilted her head back to look up at them, and Yates could not take his eyes off her face, the way the starlight caught in her eyes. I never imagined I could be this happy, she said softly. A few months ago, I thought my life was over before it really began. Now I feel like everything is just starting. It is starting, Yates said, pulling her close. We are starting. Together. She turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. Yates, I need to know. If Richard does find me, if he comes here with lawyers or law enforcement, I need to know that you will be all right. I need to know that I have not ruined your life by letting you love me. You could never ruin my life, he said fiercely. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, and if Richard Harlow shows up here, we will deal with it together. You are not alone anymore, Diana. You have me, you have Robert and Margaret, you have Mrs. Chen and everyone in this town. We protect our own here, and you are one of us now." She kissed him then, deep and passionate, pouring everything she felt into it. When they broke apart, they were both trembling. "I love you," she said, her voice shaking. "I love you so much it scares me." "I love you too," he replied, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "And I am going to marry you, Diana Harding. I am going to buy that land I have been saving for, and we are going to build a life together, a good life, if you will have me." "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you. Yes to all of it." They went back inside hand in hand and announced their engagement, and the celebration that followed was joyous and loud. Robert produced a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion, and Margaret kissed them both on the cheek and immediately started planning the wedding. Mrs. Chen looked satisfied, as if she had known all along how things would turn out. The music played until dawn, and when Yates finally took Diana back to the boarding house as the sun was rising, they were both exhausted and happier than either of them had ever been. But happiness in the West was often hard won and harder to keep. 2 weeks later, on a hot August morning, 3 men rode into town. They wore city clothes and rode expensive horses, and they asked questions about a young woman matching Diana's description. The bartender at the saloon, who had never liked strangers much, told them he had not seen anyone like that. The shopkeeper said the same. But word spread quickly, and by noon everyone knew that someone was looking for Diana. Yates was fixing a fence line when one of the ranch hands came galloping up, his horse lathered with sweat. "Boss sent me to find you," the hand said, breathing hard. "There are men in town asking about Diana. Mrs. Chen sent word that you should come quick." Yates did not waste time with questions. He swung up onto Rusty and rode hard for town, his mind racing. When he got there, he found Diana in Mrs. Chen's kitchen, pacing like a caged animal. Mrs. Chen sat at the table, her face carved from stone, a shotgun resting across her lap. "They are at the boarding house down the street," Diana said as soon as Yates came through the door. "They have been asking everyone if they have seen me. Someone will talk eventually, Yates. Someone will tell them I am here. Then we leave," Yates said immediately, "right now. We get married today and we leave. I know a place up in the mountains, an old prospector's cabin. No one goes up there anymore. We can stay there until they give up looking and leave." "They will not give up," Diana said, her voice edged with desperation. "Richard is not the kind of man who gives up. He will search until he finds me." "Then we will go farther," Yates said, taking her hands. "We will go to Oregon or Montana or Canada if we have to. I do not care where we go as long as we are together, but we are not letting them take you. I meant what I said, Diana. I will not let anyone take you anywhere you do not want to go." Mrs. Chen stood up, still holding the shotgun. "There is a minister who lives 3 miles west of here. His name is Reverend Thomas. He will marry you. No questions asked. I will have my nephew drive you in the wagon, the back way, so you do not go through town. Take whatever you need and go now. I will handle the men if they come here." Diana looked at Yates, her eyes searching his face. "Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure you want to do this? If you help me run, you will be running too. You'll be leaving everything you have built here." "You are everything," Yates said simply. "Everything else is just details. Now come on, we are wasting time." They threw together what they could in 10 minutes. Yates ran to the ranch and got his savings from the small metal box he kept under his bunk, along with his rifle and extra ammunition. He told Robert what was happening, and Robert pressed another $100 into his hand and told him to write when it was safe. Margaret packed food enough for a week and gave Diana a warm coat and a pair of pants that would be easier for riding. Mrs. Chen's nephew, a quiet young man named Wei, brought the wagon around to the back door, and they loaded it quickly. The ride to Reverend Thomas's small house was tense, every sound making them jump, but they made it without incident, And the Reverend, a kind old man with a white beard and gentle eyes, asked no questions. He married them in his small parlor with Way and the Reverend's wife as witnesses. The ceremony took less than 10 minutes, but when Yates slipped the simple gold band he had bought months ago in a fit of optimism onto Diana's finger, it felt like the most important thing he had ever done. She was his wife now, and he was her husband, and whatever came next, they would face it together. "Where will you go?" Reverend Thomas asked as they were leaving. "North," Yates said, which was not exactly a lie, but not the whole truth either. "We have friends up that way." The Reverend nodded, his eyes understanding. "May God watch over you both. And remember, a marriage is not just about the good times. It is about standing together when things get hard. You have started your life together in hard times, but that will make you stronger if you let it." They thanked him and climbed back in the wagon. Wade drove them back toward town, but stopped a mile short, at a place where the road forked. "I cannot go further without being seen," he said. "Your horse is tied in that grove of trees. Mrs. Chen thought you would need him." Yates clapped the young man on the shoulder. "Thank you. Tell your aunt we will never forget what she did for us." Way nodded and turned the wagon around, heading back the way they had come. Yates and Diana walked to the grove of trees and found Rusty waiting, along with another horse, a sturdy mare that Yates recognized as one of Robert's. There was a note tied to the mare's saddle. "Her name is Ginger. She is yours now. Be happy. Robert." Yates felt his throat tighten. He had good friends, better than he deserved. He helped Diana mount Ginger, and then he swung up onto Rusty and they rode east, away from town, away from the men who were searching for Diana, away from everything familiar. They did not speak much as they rode, saving their energy for the journey. Yates kept them off the main roads, taking game trails and creek beds, anything that would make them harder to track. They rode until dark and then made camp in a small canyon where a fire would not be visible from the road. Yates shot a rabbit and cooked it over the fire while Diana spread out their bedrolls. They ate in silence, both of them too exhausted and too worried for conversation. But as the fire burned down to embers and the night grew cold, they lay down together on the bedrolls, wrapped in each other's arms, and Yates felt Diana's body relax against his. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness, "for giving up everything for me." "I did not give up anything," he said, holding her closer. "I gained everything. You are my wife now, Diana Zimmerman. That makes me the luckiest man alive, even if we are sleeping on the ground in the middle of nowhere." She laughed softly, and he felt some of the tension drain out of her. "Diana Zimmerman," she repeated. "I like the sound of that." They traveled for 5 days, moving steadily north and east into the Sierra Nevada foothills. Yates knew these mountains from his years working ranches in the area, and he led them to places he remembered, small valleys and hidden meadows where they could rest and let the horses graze. They saw few other people, just the occasional trapper or prospector who nodded a greeting and moved on. The air grew thinner and cooler as they climbed, and the pine trees grew thick and tall around them. On the 6th day, they reached the cabin Yates had mentioned. It was a rough structure of logs and stone tucked into a small clearing beside a stream. The roof was mostly intact, and the door still hung on its hinges. Inside it was dusty and full of mouse droppings, but it was shelter and it was empty. They spent the rest of that day and all of the next cleaning it out, making it habitable. Yates repaired the worst of the holes in the roof while Diana swept and scrubbed. They had no furniture, but Yates built a rough bed frame from pine logs and filled it with spruce boughs that Diana covered with their blankets. That night, their first night alone as husband and wife in something resembling a home, they made love for the first time. It was tender and passionate and awkward in turns, both of them learning each other, discovering what brought pleasure and what brought gasps of delight. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the makeshift bed, the moonlight streaming through the small window, and Diana cried, but they were happy tears this time. "I did not think I could ever feel safe again," she said, her head on his chest, her fingers tracing the scars and calluses that marked his hands. "But I feel safe with you, Even here, even with everything that has happened, I feel safe. You are safe, Yates said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. And we are going to make a good life here, Diana. It will not be easy, but it will be good. I promise you that. The weeks that followed were hard work, but deeply satisfying. Yates hunted deer and elk for meat, and they smoked what they did not eat right away. Diana learned to fish in the stream, surprising them both with her aptitude for it. They planted a small vegetable garden with seeds Yates had grabbed from the ranch, though it was late in the season, and they did not expect much yield. Yates cut firewood, enough to last them through the winter that would come soon enough at this altitude. Diana sewed curtains from an old dress she had brought, making the cabin feel more like a home. They talked about everything during those long days of work, getting to know each other in ways they had not had time for before. Diana told him about her mother, who had died when Diana was 12, and how her father had changed after that, becoming distant and then desperate as his gambling debts mounted. She told him about the books she had loved as a child, the dreams she had once had of traveling and seeing the world. Yates told her about his siblings, wondering aloud how they were doing and if they ever thought of him. He told her about the first time he had ridden in a cattle drive, how terrified and exhilarated he had been. He told her about the places he had been and the things he had seen, and she listened with rapt attention, as if his stories were the most fascinating things she had ever heard. One evening in late September, as they sat outside the cabin watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors, Diana said, "Do you think they have stopped looking for me?" Yates had been wondering the same thing. "I do not know. It has been almost 2 months since we left. Maybe they gave up, or maybe they are still searching. We will not know unless we risk going back to find out." "I do not want to go back," Diana said quickly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. I like it here, Yates. I like our life. It is simple and hard and perfect. I do not want to lose this." "We will not lose it," he assured her. "But eventually we will need supplies, things we cannot make or hunt for ourselves. And I want to see if Robert kept the money I was saving, if he can send it to us somehow. With that money, we could buy this land, make it legal and ours, build a real house, get some cattle or sheep. Make this more than just hiding." She nodded slowly. "You are right. We cannot hide forever. But let us wait until winter has passed. Let us have this time together, just us, before we have to face the world again." "All right," he agreed. "We will wait until spring." Winter came early in the mountains, the first snow falling in mid-October. Yates had prepared as well as he could, but there were still hard days when the snow fell so thick they could not leave the cabin when their supplies ran low and they had to ration carefully. But there were also beautiful days when the sun came out and turned the snow into a blanket of diamonds, when they bundled up and went for walks through the silent forest, when they made love beside the fire and talked until dawn. Diana discovered she was pregnant in December. She woke up one morning feeling ill, and after several days of the same, they both knew what it meant. Yates was terrified and thrilled in equal measure. A baby, here, with no doctor for miles and no help if something went wrong. But Diana seemed calm, almost serene. "Women have been having babies in remote places forever," she said when she saw his worried face. "We will manage. Besides, this baby is made of tough stock. Your stubbornness and my determination. He or she will be just fine." "How can you be so sure?" Yates asked, pulling her into his arms. "Because I have to be," she said simply. "Because I refuse to let fear rule my life anymore." "I jumped from a train, Yates. I left behind everything I knew. I married a cowboy and moved to a cabin in the mountains. If I can do all that, I can certainly have a baby." He laughed despite his worry and held her close. "You are the bravest person I know." The pregnancy progressed well, and Diana stayed healthy despite the harsh conditions. Yates became even more protective, insisting she rest more, not letting her do any heavy work. She tolerated his fussing with good humor, though she drew the line when he tried to stop her from going outside at all. They spent the long winter evenings planning for the baby, arguing good-naturedly about names, imagining what their child would be like. In late February, Yates made his way down the mountain on snowshoes to a small trading post about 15 miles away. It was a risk, but they needed supplies, and he wanted to see if there was any news from Stockton. The trader, a grizzled old man named Pete, recognized him from previous years and asked no awkward questions. He sold Yates what he needed and mentioned casually that some men from San Francisco had been through a few months back, asking questions about a missing woman. Told them I had not seen anyone like that, Pete said, spitting tobacco juice into the snow. Figured it was not any of my business. They moved on after a few days, headed toward Sacramento. Have not seen them since. Yates thanked him and made the trek back up the mountain, feeling both relieved and worried. Relieved that the men seemed to have given up the immediate search, worried that they might return. He decided not to tell Diana about it yet, not while she was pregnant and vulnerable. There would be time enough to worry about Richard Harlow in San Francisco after the baby came. Spring arrived in bursts, the snow melting in the lower elevations while still clinging to the higher peaks. The stream beside the cabin swelled with runoff, and the meadows began to turn green. Diana grew larger and more uncomfortable, but she never complained. Yates became an expert at rubbing her swollen feet and making her comfortable with extra pillows made from stuffed sacks. The baby came in early May, during a warm afternoon when the wildflowers were blooming in profusion around the cabin. Diana's labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Yates was convinced he was going to lose her, when he prayed to a God he had not talked to since childhood. But Diana was strong, stronger than he had imagined, and just before sunset she gave birth to a baby boy who announced his arrival with a lusty cry that echoed off the mountains. Yates cut the cord with shaking hands and wrapped his son in clean cloth, then placed him in Diana's arms. She was exhausted, her hair plastered to her head with sweat, but she was smiling, her face radiant. "He is perfect," she whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes. "He is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Yates asked, sitting beside her on the bed, unable to take his eyes off the tiny miracle they had created. "Jacob," Diana said without hesitation, "after my grandfather. He was the only one in my family who ever really listened to me, who ever made me feel like I mattered. Jacob Zimmerman." "Jacob," Yates repeated, testing the name. He touched his son's tiny hand, and Jacob's fingers wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength. "Jacob Zimmerman. I like it. Welcome to the world, son. You are stuck with us now." Diana laughed, tired but happy. "Poor child. What has he done to deserve such crazy parents?" "He will be fine," Yates said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "He has got you for a mother. That makes him the luckiest boy alive." The weeks after Jacob's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and constant worry. Every time the baby cried, Yates was sure something was wrong, but Diana seemed to know instinctively what to do. She nursed Jacob and sang to him and rocked him when he fussed. Yates did everything else, cooking and cleaning and washing endless diapers in the stream. He had never been so tired or so happy in his entire life. As spring turned to summer, they knew they could not stay isolated forever. They needed supplies, proper baby things, and Diana needed to be seen by a doctor to make sure she had recovered properly from the birth. More than that, they needed to know if it was safe to come out of hiding, if Richard Harlow had finally given up his search. In June, when Jacob was 6 weeks old, they made the decision to return to Stockton. It was a risk, but they could not live in the mountains forever, not with a baby to think about. They packed up what they could carry, loading it onto the 2 horses and a mule Yates had traded for at Pete's post. Diana rode Ginger with Jacob strapped securely to her chest in a sling Yates had fashioned. They traveled slowly, taking breaks every few hours for Diana to nurse the baby and for all of them to rest. The journey took a week, and by the time they saw the outskirts of Stockton in the distance, Yates was tense with worry. But Diana seemed calm, her hand steady as she held Jacob close. "Whatever happens, we face it together," she said, and Yates nodded, his jaw set with determination. They rode straight to Robert's ranch, bypassing the town itself. Margaret saw them coming and ran out to meet them, tears streaming down her face. "Yates! Diana! Oh, my lord, is that a baby?" She pulled Diana down from the horse carefully and immediately took Jacob, cooing over him, while Robert came out to shake Yates's hand and clap him on the back. "We heard you two got married and ran off, Shishkiki," Robert said, his eyes twinkling. "Mrs. Chen would not say where you went, just that you were safe. We have been worried sick." "We are safe," Yates said. "But we need to know, have those men been back? The ones looking for Diana?" Robert's face grew serious. "They came back twice more, about a month apart. The last time was in March. They questioned everyone, got pretty aggressive about it. But no one would tell them anything. Mrs. Chen actually chased them off her property with that shotgun of hers. After that, they left, and we have not seen them since. Far as we know, they gave up and went back to San Francisco." Diana sagged with relief, and Yates put his arm around her shoulders to steady her. "Do you think it is safe for us to stay? Really safe?" Margaret handed Jacob back to Diana and took both of them by the arms. "You listen to me. You are both part of this community. That baby makes it even more true. If anyone comes here looking to cause you trouble, they will have to go through all of us. Now come inside, get cleaned up and fed, and we will figure out what comes next." What came next was a new beginning. With Robert's help, Yates was able to claim the land where their cabin sat, filing the paperwork and making it legal. He used his savings to buy a small herd of cattle, 20 head to start, and some chickens and a pig. They spent that summer and fall improving the cabin, adding a second room for Jacob and reinforcing the roof and walls. Robert hired a carpenter to help with the work, and soon the cabin was transformed into a proper house. Diana kept the books for several ranches in the area, work she could do from home while caring for Jacob. The income was modest but steady, and combined with what Yates made from selling cattle and doing occasional work for Robert, they were able to live comfortably. Mrs. Chen came to visit once a month, bringing supplies and gossip from town, always staying for a few days to dote on Jacob. 2 years passed, and there was no sign of Richard Harlow or anyone from Diana's old life. Slowly, they began to relax, to believe that they were truly safe. Diana still occasionally had nightmares about the train and what might have happened if she had not jumped, but Yates was always there to hold her when she woke, to remind her that she was safe and loved and home. In the fall of 1885, Diana gave birth to their second child, a girl they named Rose after the wild roses that grew around their house. The birth was easier this time, and Yates was less terrified, though he still paced outside until Margaret came out to tell him mother and daughter were doing fine. Jacob, now 3 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything even when his help made things more difficult. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The herd grew, and Yates built a proper barn and expanded the corrals. Diana planted a larger garden, and they had enough vegetables to last through the winter with some left over to trade. Jacob learned to ride, sitting in front of Yates on Rusty's back, squealing with delight. Rose grew from a baby into a toddler, her dark hair and gray eyes marking her unmistakably as Diana's daughter. In the spring of 1887, a letter arrived at the ranch. Robert brought it up himself, his face serious. It was addressed to Diana Harding, care of Robert McAllister, and it bore a San Francisco postmark. Diana stared at it for a long time before opening it, her hands shaking. Yates stood beside her, ready to support her through whatever the letter contained. It was from a lawyer, brief and formal. Her father had died 6 months earlier, the letter said. His estate had been settled, and there was a small inheritance for Diana if she wished to claim it. The letter made no mention of Richard Harlow or the broken engagement. It was all very proper and businesslike, as if Diana had simply been away on an extended trip rather than running for her life. "He is dead," Diana said softly, staring at the letter. "My father is dead, and I did not even know." Yates put his arms around her, feeling her tremble. "I am sorry, Diana. I know things were complicated between you, but he was still your father." "I should feel something," she said, tears starting to run down her cheeks. "Sadness or grief or anger, but I just feel numb. He sold me to pay his debts, Yates. He put me on that train knowing I did not want to marry Richard, knowing I was terrified, and he did it anyway because it was convenient for him. And now he is gone, and I will never get the chance to tell him how much he hurt me or to hear him apologize or to forgive him. It is just over. You can still forgive him, Yates said gently. Forgiveness is not for the dead. It is for you, so you do not have to carry that weight anymore. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. When did you become so wise? I married you, he said, trying to lighten the mood. That was the wisest thing I ever did. Everything else is just luck. She laughed despite her tears and held him tight. After a long moment, she said, I do not want the inheritance. Whatever it is, it feels like blood money. I would rather earn our living honestly than take anything from that life. Then we will tell the lawyer that, Yates said, or we can take it and give it to charity or use it to help other women who need to escape bad situations. Whatever you want, Diana, it is your choice. In the end, they claimed the inheritance, which turned out to be $5,000 more money than either of them had ever seen. They gave half to Mrs. Chen to expand her boarding house and help more women in need. With the other half, they bought more land, expanding their ranch and buying a better herd. They built a proper house, bigger than the cabin, with real windows and wooden floors. They hired a hand to help with the work, a young man named Tom who had showed up at their door looking for a job and had proven himself reliable and hardworking. The years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Jacob grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved reading as much as his mother and working cattle as much as his father. Rose was wild and fearless, always climbing trees and catching frogs and getting into trouble. In 1890, Diana gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Samuel. He was quiet and observant from birth, content to watch the world with solemn eyes. By 1895, the Zimmerman Ranch was one of the most successful in the area. They ran over 200 head of cattle and had contracts to supply beef to several towns. Jacob was 14 now, doing a man's work on the ranch. Rose was 10 and still as wild as ever, though she had developed a talent for horse training that surprised everyone. Samuel was 5, following his siblings around with determined devotion. One afternoon in the summer of that year, a fancy carriage pulled up the road to their house. Yates and Diana were sitting on the porch, watching their children play in the yard, and they both tensed when they saw it. Visitors and carriages were rare this far from town, and expensive carriages were almost unheard of. A man stepped out, well-dressed and middle-aged, with graying hair and a careful expression. He approached the porch slowly, his hands visible and empty. Mr. and Mrs. Zimmerman, my name is Charles Preston. I am a lawyer from San Francisco. I apologize for the intrusion, but I have been trying to locate Diana Harding for some time, and I was recently informed that she might be found here. Diana stood up, her hand finding Yates's. I am Diana Harding, or I was. I am Diana Zimmerman now. What do you want? Preston smiled, a genuine smile that softened his formal demeanor. I want to give you some news that I think you will find welcome. Richard Harlow died last month. Pneumonia. His estate has been settled, and in going through his papers, we found evidence of several illegal business dealings and some disturbing personal behavior. The details are not important, but suffice it to say that if you had married him, your life would have been as terrible as you feared. Your instincts were correct, Mrs. Zimmerman. Diana sat down abruptly, and Yates sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. Why are you telling me this? She asked, her voice shaking. Because you have been living in fear for 13 years, Preston said gently. Because I thought you deserved to know that the man you were running from can never hurt you now. And because I wanted to apologize, on behalf of everyone who should have protected you and did not, your father, Richard Harlow, even the society that made such arrangements possible, you should never have been put in that position, and I am truly sorry that you were. Thank you, Diana said. And then to Yates's surprise, she started to laugh. It was a sound of pure relief, of a burden lifted. He is dead. After all these years, after all the nightmares and all the fear, he is just dead. And I am here, alive and happy, with a husband I love and children who are healthy and a life that is good. I won." "You did," Preston agreed. "You won in every way that matters. I will leave you in peace now. I just wanted you to know that you are truly free, Mrs. Zimmerman. There is nothing and no one left to fear." He tipped his hat and returned to his carriage, and they watched as it rolled away down the road. When it was out of sight, Diana turned to Yates, and he saw in her face a peace that had not been there before, a final releasing of the past. "It is really over," she said wonderingly. "All of it. I am free." "You have been free since the day you jumped from that train," Yates said, taking her hands. "You freed yourself, Diana. I just caught you so you did not break anything." She laughed again and kissed him, right there on the porch with their children watching and giggling. "You did more than catch me," she said. "You gave me a life worth living. You gave me love and a home and children and everything I never dared to dream of. You saved me, Yates Zimmerman. In every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," he corrected, pulling her close, "and we built something beautiful together. This life, this family, this love, it is all ours, and no one can ever take it away." That evening, after the children were in bed, they sat on the porch again, watching the stars come out. The air was warm and sweet with the smell of roses, and somewhere in the distance a coyote sang to the moon. Diana leaned against Yates's shoulder, content and peaceful, and he held her close, marveling at how much life could change in 13 years. "Do you ever regret it?" Diana asked softly. "Catching me that day, taking on all my problems and giving up your old life?" "Never," Yates said firmly. "Not once. Not for a single second. That was the day my real life started. Everything before it was just practice for being with you." She turned her face up to his, and in the starlight he could see the tears on her cheeks, happy tears this time. "I love you," she said. "I will love you for the rest of my life and beyond." "And I love you," he replied, kissing her softly. "Always and forever, Diana, always and forever." The years continued to unfold, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Jacob eventually took over much of the ranch work, growing into a strong, capable man who married a teacher from town and gave Diana and Yates their first grandchildren. Rose, true to her wild nature, became a renowned horse trainer traveling throughout California and Oregon with her skills. She married late, at 30, to a veterinarian who appreciated her independent spirit. Samuel became a lawyer, dedicating his practice to helping women escape dangerous situations, inspired by his mother's story. Diana and Yates grew old together, their hair turning white, their bodies growing creaky, but their love never diminishing. They spent their evenings on the porch they had built together, watching their grandchildren play in the same yard where their children had played. They told stories about the old days, about cattle drives and harsh winters and the time Diana jumped from a train and changed both their lives forever. On a warm September evening in 1920, 38 years after the day he caught her, Yates held Diana's hand as she took her last breath. She was 71 years old, and she had lived a full, rich life. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her bed, and her last words were simple and true. "I was happy. I was so very happy." Yates followed her 6 months later, his body simply giving up without her beside him. He was 74, and he died in his sleep in the house they had built together, his hand reaching across the bed to where she used to lie. They buried him next to her on a hill overlooking the ranch under a sky as blue and wide as the West itself. Their legacy lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch that still bore their name, in the stories that were told about the woman who jumped from a train and the cowboy who caught her. It was a story of courage and love, of building something beautiful from desperate circumstances, of choosing happiness even when the world seemed determined to deny it. And on warm summer evenings, when the roses bloomed around the old house and the stars came out bright and clear, people sometimes said they could feel the presence of Diana and Yates still there, still watching over the land they had loved, still holding each other close, still whispering promises of always and forever. Their love had been tested by fear and distance and time itself, but it had endured, and that endurance had created ripples that spread far beyond their own lives, touching everyone who heard their story and reminding them that love, real love, the kind that catches you when you fall and never asks why, is the most powerful force in the world. It was a love story for the ages, born in a moment of desperation and grown into something that would outlast them both. A testament to the truth that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is jump, and sometimes the best thing a person can do is be there to catch them when they do.